So first of all, thank you to the National Zero Waste Council, I think both for inviting me to speak here, I think for hosting this event, and also for the leadership on this really important issue, but also opportunity in Canada. I wanted to just share what we've been doing in the US. ReFed has been around for a couple of years, taking a really similar approach, data-driven on what are the problems, what are the solutions to food waste through a multi-stakeholder approach. I hope the lessons you'll take from me today are, this is a problem, it's a huge opportunity, and it's going to take a systems approach to achieve value. Let me share some of the problems we have in the US. So 40% of food is wasted. That's on the upper end of the range that Malcolm just shared for Canada. It happens across the value chain, from where food is produced on farms, through manufacturing, through consumer-facing business like your grocery stores, restaurants, food service in institutions, and then also in consumers' homes. If you think about the global perspective, the food waste happens at very different stages depending on developed economies versus developing economies. So the picture in the US, and I suspect the picture in Canada, is similar to having food waste further down the value chain with consumer-facing businesses and consumers themselves. If you look at developing countries, because of lack of markets and infrastructure, a lot of the food waste happens further up the supply chain, so with producers and in manufacturing. We quantified the problem in the US and released a roadmap that I'll talk about here in a moment, but 63 million tons of food are wasted in the US. In dollar terms, that's over $200 billion in economic value. That's, in the US, that's 1.3% of GDP, so huge problem. It also is a huge drain on resources, so 20% of the US land, water, fertilizer is used in producing food that then is transported across the country, distributed, and then thrown into landfill. That also is the leading material source in US landfills, accounting for about 21% of the US landfill volume. And as Malcolm mentioned, a leading contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, a particularly potent form, methane. So huge problem across the value chain. In looking at some of the underlying causes, it's different at different stages of the value chain. So at farms, it's often a lack of a market for, let's say, a grade B product, or market prices drop and it's not worth the marginal cost, or labor availability isn't there to go and take that harvest or take a second pass at the harvest to make sure that that full crop is harvested. Manufacturing has actually been, I would say, a bright spot. Manufacturers, by nature, through lean manufacturing, have really managed waste well. The total volume that they have available is much larger than what I've represented here, but they found outlets for that through value-added products and also through donations. With consumer-facing businesses, this is where we're seeing tremendous opportunity, particularly with retail, with restaurants, and with food service. And in fact, ReFed has been working with those industry groups to produce guides that will be coming out at the beginning of next year. I'll share a few of those lessons learned and happy to take questions on those as well. And then with consumers, the average US household spends $1,500 on food that they purchase, bring home, and then throw in the garbage. As we're thinking about growing income inequality and people struggling to make ends meet, this is a huge cost savings opportunity at the household level. Meanwhile, 42 million Americans are food insecure. So we have this huge resource and problem. We have an opportunity to change that and to solve a lot of our societal problems through this waste to value creation concept. So ReFed developed a roadmap to reduce US food waste by 20%, and we called for a systems approach, which I'll speak to in a moment, and I think really mirrors the approach that the Zero Waste Council is taking here in Canada. One of those components is financing, and we've called for an $18 billion investment over the next 10 years that will yield over $100 billion in societal economic value. That also comes with a variety of other benefits. So we can double the number of food meals donated through our food recovery system. We can conserve natural resources and emit fewer greenhouse gas emissions. And we can create jobs. One of the things that I think is unique about this issue set is that the support is widespread. Whether you care about environmental issues, resource conservation, and greenhouse gas emissions, Whether you care about feeding your community or whether you care about job creation in your community, this issue is an opportunity for you. And we've seen incredibly widespread support in an otherwise very divisive political environment. I would also just point out from a meal recovery perspective, the number of meals available to be donated could actually feed all of those food insecure people in the US, and I think that's an important just connection to note. Approach-wise, we think that policy is important, innovation, which we talked about, education is that behavior change, and then this financing gap, which is one I'd like to see highlighted as we go forward in Canada as well. We have a patchwork of state regulations that are causing problems for harmonization. It's a barrier, for example, in date labeling if consumers have many different date labels in states that require different date labels, and they cannot be educated on what a date label means until we actually have standardization. We have an innovator database that has trends of what's happening in innovation, and I would say this is a bright spot. This is a growing industry. I was in Boston yesterday with a number of innovators in the area and investors ranging from foundations to large-scale private equity firms who are looking at this space as an opportunity. The financing gap is this huge number, 18 billion, but when you break that up and think about who are the actors who need to make those investments, it starts to become achievable. And we do have a big financing gap remaining. For example, in the US, we track the number of foundation grants given in this space. We've identified a gap of 300 million, particularly for food recovery solutions, and currently we're at 75 million. So we have made some progress, have a lot more opportunity to go. But we're seeing increased interest from institutional investors. I wrote a report last week for a very large private equity firm in the US and foundations who are really leaning into this opportunity. I'll leave the talk at that, but looking forward to engaging in the panel discussion today and also questions from the audience. So thank you.